All right, our last and final speaker of this section. She hails from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She's a graduate of School of the Future. She is also president of the NAACP. And I've also had like a few one-on-one conversations with her, and I can tell you that this woman here, actually, when she speaks her mind, it's worth listening to. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Miss Tiara Dowling.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Tiara Dowling, and today I will be speaking to you about intersectionality in social justice work. We have numerous conversations about intersectionality in social justice work, but do we really know what these terms mean? Do we, as many say, practice what we preach in and outside of academic spaces? I know having an intersectional lens is difficult, and it is even more difficult to implement it into your social justice work. So, what is intersectionality in social justice? Intersectionality is a theory that states that various aspects of the human identity do not exist separately, but they form to create various forms of oppression within one human being. And social justice, as I will define it, is a lifestyle in which you fight and work towards bringing injustices experienced by oppressed groups to the forefront in order to seek justice and equity. So, in January 2017, there was a Women's March in Washington, D.C., as well as various other cities across the United States. This Women's March was to raise awareness about human rights issues, such as reproductive rights and LGBTQA rights. Now, this march wasn't accessible to all women due to transportation, the location of it, and financial means. For example, there were buses that left from State College down to Washington, D.C., but the seats were between $45 to $80 a piece. Most students cannot afford that. I know I can't afford it just out of the blue. So, this picture here is from the Women's March in State College. This picture here is from the Women's March in DC. The Women's March in State College recently was very intersectional in my opinion, in terms of occupation, race, class, and gender. There were students, there are professors, wives, mothers, husbands, fathers, and friends, all working towards a more progressive state college. Intersectionality is important to consider when having these discussions on topics such as rape and sexual assault, to see how people are affected by these issues with their numerous identities. And by numerous identities, I mean how their personal identities intersect with maybe their political or social identities. For example, I'm a Black woman, and my identities, they intersect with my class, my sexuality, my major even, my style of dress. And so when you think about these things, you have to think in these discussions that you have in the classroom or with your friends, how the person sitting next to you may feel about this topic. Women of color throughout history are socially tied to white men in a way that is not beneficial. It is from the slave and slave master social relation. The slave master was given the space to do as he pleased with his slaves with no consequence. Therefore, white men did not see their crimes, such as rape and murder, to women of color as bad, because to them, those women were extremely promiscuous and extremely immoral. Now, imagine Penn State ignoring the cries of people who experience rape and sexual assault due to their religion or their race. Or imagine Penn State ignoring the voice of a student who is falsely accused of a crime due to their race or religion. I hope that we all would protest daily to bring Penn State's injustices to light. This was the case for Joanne Little and Delbert Timms. Joanne Little is an Afro-American woman who was tried for the murder of her jail guard, Clarence Alligood, who came into her cell with an ice pick, the same weapon that she used to murder him, he used to threaten her. Throughout her case, she gained a lot of support from Black women and white women. Very known women, such as Angela Davis, supported Joanne Little throughout her case. As soon as she got acquitted of her charges, she made it a point to say that we need to support Delbert Timms. Now, in the summer of 1975, when Joanne Little was being tried for her murder, Delbert Timms was just at the beginning of his. He was being falsely accused for the rape of a white woman. When Joanne Little asked for all women of the anti-rape movement to support Delbert Timms, Black women jumped at the opportunity and they all supported. But white women were reluctant to, until the summer of 1978, when Delbert Timms was acquitted of all charges. That is 3 years after he was first falsely accused of the rape of this white woman. It brought to the surface the skeptical beliefs that Black women already had, that the anti-rape movement was ignorant to their issues, ignorant to the intersections of racism and sexism. Black and white women, which was Black men and Black women, are historically binded, which is brought to the surface every time a Black woman challenges her rape. It is simultaneously, as she challenges that rape, brought to the surface that the Black man experiences these same things, but in a different way, being falsely accused. So they are binded by the violence at the hands of white men, Black women by rape and murder, and Black men by being falsely accused, driven by racist attitudes of crimes they cannot commit. Alice Walker, who is a well-known Afro-American author, presented at a panel titled "The Black Woman, the Myths and Realities." She presented with her friend research on suicides committed by women of color in the United States, most of whom were university students. When she presented this research, she expected support back from the panel, which was made up of Black women. She did not receive this support. Instead, a Black woman on the panel said, and I quote, "The Black woman's responsibility is to the Black man, no matter what he does," end quote. To add on to the unspoken loyalty that many women of color have to men of color, many women do not report their attacks due to the ongoing distrust between communities of color and police. Police were, and still are, seen as a presence of hostility within communities of color. I say all this to help you understand the complexities of racism and sexism within communities of color that women go through and men go through. This is also a picture from the Women's March in Washington, D.C. Speaking of racism and sexism, the feminist movement was a movement to fight for the equality of men and women, politically, socially, and economically. In terms of history, the first wave was focused on voting rights. Now, white women had the right to vote, as well as Afro-American women. But there were tactics in place to keep these Afro-American women from voting, such as voting tax and comprehension tests. Not to mention that Native American and Asian American women struggled with their citizenship for years and did not get the right to vote or their citizenship until well into the 1940s and the early 1950s. This movement is considered narrow in terms of how they go about their issues and who they include in their issues. The feminist movement within the United States is criticized on a national level as well as a global level. It has this notion that all women experience things the same universally, which is not true. In terms of intersectionality, I would argue that intersectionality began in the second wave of feminism, and it is still crawling. We are not there all the way. And if you are a women's gender and sexuality major, as I am, you know that this field is ever changing. We learn information every day. Terms such as cisgender, demisexual, pansexual, etc. So you have to learn to adapt and apply these into your studies or your research in an intersectional way to include all women. During one of my courses, as I have said, I'm a women's studies major, women's gender and sexualities, and a criminology major. During my time here, I've had a class during my freshman year where we talked about Black female sexuality. I like the topic. Many people like the topic. But the topic was shadowed by men. A Black woman's sexuality, or any woman's sexuality for that matter, should not be shadowed by the objectification of men. Our sexuality is much more than that. The professor spent about 20 minutes showing hip-hop videos and rap videos, as if hip-hop and rap videos are the only videos with misogynistic and half-naked women in their videos. Then we spent the last 5 minutes of class talking about Black female sexuality, and she turned to me and she said, "How do you feel about it?" Me, a freshman, coming from Philadelphia, 2 Black parents, I really didn't know about Black female sexuality at the time, so I said what I knew best. I garnered it back to my hair. I was like, people constantly talk about my hair and talk about how I wear it, whether it's a wig, a weave, or my natural hair, straight, curly, twist out. That's all I could think about. And I didn't know that at the time that her calling me out wasn't what a professor was supposed to do. And I wish at that time I had knew more about Black women's sexuality and all the things that went on in that class. Another thing is that we only talked about Black hetero women. LGBTQA Black women are often forgotten in these conversations, even though they have contributed greatly to the constant freedom struggle that we all, as the Black community, encounter in the United States. This is a picture from the Not My President protests, organized and executed by QTPOC, which is short for Queer and Trans People of Color. This was one of, if not only, the only intersectional protest and or demonstration that I have seen on this campus. I could not attend, but it was moving to know that many people from various backgrounds took a stand with this organization in peace against our president. Many of the people in this picture identify within the LGBTQA community. And during writing this speech, I talked to them and I said, what would you like me to say? Like, how can I say these things in a good way? You know, you want to sound politically correct and you want to sound good. But I realized that wasn't the focus. As I've said before, many women within this community have fought for the rights of Black people throughout our history. Women such as Josephine Baker, Angela Davis, and Ruth Ellis, and they are often forgotten. Some of them even had to hide their identities. So I propose to all of us that we continue having demonstrations, even conversations or protests that are intersectional with various backgrounds in the room to hear different perspectives. Because as Penn State students, we are all here to learn. And if you consider yourself an advocate, then you need to be in the space with the people that you are advocating for. Because you cannot advocate for someone that you never talked to. You cannot advocate for someone that you never worked with. And you cannot advocate for people and speak for them in a way that they do not want to be spoken for. And that's where the intersectionality comes in. An intersectional lens, like putting glasses on, putting them on and never taking them off. Thank you.